You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-call. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-call. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn.
Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Jessica Corey, guest hosting tonight for John Caldera, and you're watching Independent Thinking. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Cuba, and no, we're not talking about cigars. We're talking about agriculture and what our state leaders should be doing, or if they should be helping in this current economic crisis where farmers are not alone in facing lower revenues. Should Colorado export to Cuba? Tonight we have two experts. First, we have Tim Larson. He's an agricultural expert with the State Department of Agriculture, specializing in international marketing. And then we have Representative Jerry Sonnenberg, and he is a farmer in Sterling, and you specialize in wheat, corn, and I'm sorry, what was the third?
Sunflowers and melons.
Sunflowers and melons, the best part of it. So let's start things off, Mr. Larson. Tell us what's going on here. People who've been reading the papers have seen that the Post has come out and endorsing a trade relationship based on agriculture in Cuba. And this all goes back to the Ritter administration and its proposal or its support for some sort of trading relationship.
Yes, and actually it goes back further than that. In 2000, U.S. Congress passed some regulation which changed and basically legalized the trade of agricultural products to Cuba from the United States. In 2001, the U.S. exported $6 million in agricultural products to Cuba. Last year, it exceeded $700 million. So what we have is one of the few growing markets for U.S. agricultural products. When we look at what they're buying, one of the most important things they buy is wheat, and they specifically want the variety we grow in Colorado, hard red winter wheat. We now find that Cuba is actually the 5th largest market for U.S. hard red winter wheat in the world.
So how do you make this matter to somebody at home who's never been to the Eastern Plains and they're chomping on their Cinnamon Toast Crunch? Why does this matter to them? Why should they support agricultural trade?
Well, agriculture performs an important element of Colorado's economy. If you go out in rural Colorado, we have counties where 60% of all the jobs in some counties are tied to the agribusiness industry. So agriculture provides the basic core of that, all the rural economies in Colorado. And in the case of wheat, the U.S. exports 50% of all the wheat they grow. Colorado exports 80% of all the wheat grown in Colorado is ultimately exported. So our wheat industry is very interested in seeing where they can grow new markets, and Cuba is one of those. So it just adds to that economic strength for agriculture by looking at those other markets.
Now, this is a nonpartisan issue. Here you are representing the agricultural voice of a Democrat governor, and you are a Republican state representative and a farmer. Talk about support in your community, or what sort of opposition you're facing to this proposal. Certainly, you've been out there at the front of this.
Well, and the truth is, quite honestly, there's been very little opposition to getting something started out in rural Colorado. You're looking at agriculture as the 3rd largest industry in this state, and so things that happen to agriculture also benefit or hurt the state when we hurt agriculture or benefit agriculture. When we open new markets, that's always positive for an economy, especially an economy that's struggling the way Colorado or in the United States economy has struggled.
How bad are things out where you are?
Well, you can look at input costs over the last 5 years. I'm talking about fertilizer have gone up approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500%. And that all relates to fuel costs, those type of things. My largest input is fuel alone. Diesel fuel, of course, we all know what that did a year ago and how we continue to battle that. So even though prices may be up a little bit, we are still not meeting those costs to produce that product and produce the food. And we still eat for less than 10% of our disposable income.
Now, a question to both of you, and particularly to you, I guess, to start. What would you say to opponents of agricultural trade, like former Republican Governor Bill Owens, who says it sends the wrong message to be investing or even beginning trade negotiations with what he calls the murderers of the Castro family. What do you say to them?
Well, and I don't think there's any question. They are murderers, and they're people that we don't trust and don't do business with, or choose not to do business with. But quite frankly, embargoes that we have used over the last number of years, whether it's been Cuba or anywhere else. Cuba, we've had a embargo now for some 40, 45 years. And I guess in my tongue-in-cheek way, it sure brought the Castros to their knees. In fact, it hasn't. It hasn't changed anything. The way embargoes work is other countries then pick up those markets. And if they're short of that product, they buy from the United States at a discount price and then sell to Cuba, and it just goes to the same place. So what I would say is embargoes don't work. Trade restrictions to other countries don't work, and food is not and should not be used as a weapon.
Now, before the show, we were talking about trade with other countries who have similar or worse reputations than Cuba. Talk for a moment about that.
Well, I think, when we look at it from our department standpoint, we don't make policy. We just, work with our industry and help them look at new markets. But when we went back and looked at that, the U.S. regularly trades with Syria, Iran, Libya, Vietnam. Nobody can deny that China isn't a communist country, in Venezuela. So, I agree with Representative Sonnenberg. Don't politicize agriculture. Let our farmers maintain the markets they have, and Cuba is just another one of those where we think there's a great potential. I think what's unique about our trade with Cuba, as it is now and as it might expand, versus, say, Venezuela, we are simply looking at selling products into Cuba, and they've not talked about opening the imports of products from Cuba. Other countries, such as Venezuela, we're importing $34 billion in petroleum every year from Venezuela.
Now, so it's been almost 50 years since we started the Cuban embargo in this country. Why is it that we still have it all these years later when we don't have we have trade with other countries like Venezuela or Vietnam?
I don't know. I mean, the rule changed in 2000. The U.S.
Do you think
legislature
it's representative of the political clout that remains within the Cuban immigrant community?
Well, I think much so. Part of it was the early on where Cuba was a direct link for the Soviets. They were a threat, and so there was some discussion that indeed we got to cut the strings with Cuba. But when the Cold War ended, that political judgment didn't change, and I think that's one of the things that has been slow change, and I'm hoping will indeed change. Cuba is no longer a huge threat to us in the United States. They still have a couple of brothers that don't take care of business the way we think things ought to be taken care of, but they're not the huge political threat when they were the front door for Russia.
Now, we talked a little bit about the sentiment in your district, but what are you hearing statewide? Certainly this has been a hot issue, editorialized by the Post. We've seen prominent news coverage. Are you getting a lot of kickback from opponents, or is it mostly supportive as well?
I have heard nothing negative. I mean, the industry, when we started this, it's our commodity groups, our agricultural organizations, our food processors who have been talking to us for years saying, we need to be looking at Cuba. The market's opening, it's increasing. There's new legislation this year in Congress. Senate Bill 1089 in the U.S. Senate would totally liberalize U.S. citizen travel to Cuba.
What are its political prospects?